All right, this will be the beginning of Creation Science 102, our second class. In the first 10-week course, we talked about the age of the Earth and the Big Bang Theory and things that are in my seminar parts 1 and 2A. And we left off in the middle of talking about the cavemen. We left off talking about Jack Cuozzo and his tremendous book, Buried Alive, which is just about the Neanderthal men. Jack Cuozzo is a dentist. He studied all of them, went and saw the actual bones instead of the reproductions, or what most people see as just a casting. And he has pictures in here showing how that they've been constructed wrong, and they're just normal humans who have diseases like rickets and arthritis and acromegaly and things like that. By the way, in case you don't know, the Neanderthal, the H is silent, Neanderthal man is named after the Neander Valley, which was named after Joachim Neander, who was a German Christian who used to wander through that valley, and he composed a song that's in our songbook. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. O my soul, praise Him, for He is thy health and salvation. He's the one who wrote that song, and Neander Valley is named after him. And of course, Satan likes to counterfeit or undo all the good that the Lord does, so now we have Neanderthal man named after the same valley, because that's where it was found. The first one was found in 1856. Shortly thereafter, Charles Darwin's book came out, and evolution became a popular theory. When the Neanderthal man was first found, it was classified by the experts who studied it as a human who probably drowned in the flood. They said he had received several blows to the head because there were some bumps on his head where he had been hit pretty hard and healed. And he had several diseases. I think he said he suffered from rickets in old age and some other disease, or rickets in childhood and arthritis in old age. That was the analysis of the skeleton. And that analysis is still valid today, but because they don't have any other missing links, they've decided to use Neanderthal man as a missing link when it's not at all. It's just 100% human. Recently, there was a study done that said the Neanderthal DNA is 3 or 4% different than average human DNA. I'm not sure exactly what they studied about the DNA, but that's now the big thing in the news, that Neanderthal man is not even part of the human lineage. When actually, the variation from normal human DNA is 5 or 6 or 7% either way. This guy's 3 or 4% off of the average, so he's within the range of human anyway. Now, how they can say, you know, he's not human, I don't know, but yeah, I'd recommend you get Cuozzo's book if you want to study more on the Neanderthals. It's just really tremendous book, well written. When he first began doing research on this in France, his life was threatened because this is big business. These missing links are big business for the people who make money off of them. You know, they've got these museums displaying these fossils, and people pay money to come see this, and he was saying, hey, it's just a normal human. And so his life was threatened. They chased his car. He had to outrun somebody who was chasing his car trying to kill him. It tells the whole drama in here of what happened in the Neanderthals. Okay, let's talk about Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. Donald Johanson found Lucy in 1974 in the Hadar Valley. Donald Johanson was a nobody. Nobody had ever heard of him, and now he's a famous scientist because he found this Lucy creature. He admitted in this book, Bones of Contention, that he had received a grant of, I think, $47,000 to go look for missing links. So for him to say he found a missing link is like getting someone, a mother, to write a job recommendation for their own son. You know, it's a little bit of a slanted opinion. Of course, he had to find something. He was about to run out of grant money when somebody brought him some bones, and they went and dug them up and discovered Lucy. There's an awful lot of controversy about Lucy, and I want to share with you in this section just a little bit about Lucy. Hadar Valley is in Ethiopia. You can see it on the map right there. This is part of the Great Rift Valley. There's a crack all the way across this part of Africa, sort of like the Grand Canyon, only it's obviously a fault line like the San Andreas Fault, called the Great Rift Valley. And many so-called missing links come from this area in Ethiopia and down into Kenya. So this is a common place for them to go look for fossils or the so-called missing links. Lucy, when Donald Johanson found Lucy, he found 40% of the skeleton. Here it is right here. While they were digging out these bones, they were listening to a song that was very famous at the time, a rock and roll song by the Beatles called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which has the initials LSD, on purpose. The Beatles were very big into drugs. We can go off on a long tangent there if we'd like. one of the Beatles' songs, as they're singing whatever the main song was, in the background you can hear, if you change the speaker over to the left or right speaker, whichever it is, you hear some people chanting through the entire song, smoke pot, smoke pot, smoke pot, through the whole song, as a subliminal effect to get into the conscious of kids in the early 70s. On one of the Beatles' record albums, on the cover of the album, they're all standing there with their suits and ties, smiling for the picture. All around them is marijuana plants. Not a lot of people caught that, of course, you know, but wow, it's marijuana plants everywhere. It looks like you know, shrubbery around them or something, but it's all marijuana plants. They were very big into drugs. Anyway, Johansen was listening to the song as they dug it out, so they decided to name this skeleton Lucy. There is an awful lot of controversy about this. There are some who think, and have some pretty good evidence, that the hip bone actually came from a young African girl. It wasn't even part of this skeleton. It was brought later. You have to understand how these guys find their fossils. They will go to Africa and they will hire the local natives to go look for bones. And they will pay them if they're successful, and bring them some good fossil skeletons. Well, in a country where the people are starving to death and any amount of money is great, you know, there's a real strong indication that they're likely to bring in anything, you know, and try to get you to buy it, you know, as a missing link. So Donald Johansen found 40% of the skeleton. This is considered the most complete Australopithecine ever found. So one of the quiz questions will be, what is the most famous Australopithecine? This is supposed to be part of the missing links for, you know, A-U-S-T-R, let's see, we better look that one up. Like Australia, comes from the root word Australia. And then the last part is Afarensis, A-F-E-R-E-N-S-I-S, for Africa. Afarensis. The whole thing is explained in how they named them, etc., in this book, Bones of Contention, which is $13 through our ministry, or you can buy it for $13.50 through other places if you'd like, but it's really a very good book, and it's got a section on each of the so-called cavemen. But Lucy, there's Australopithecus there, A-U-S-T-R-A-L-O-P-I-T-H-E-C-U-S, Australopithecus, just to the right of the circle on the left. They have Australopithecus robustus and Australopithecus afarensis. Robustus means it's bigger and stronger, more robust, where that gets the name. Donald Johansen claimed that he found this creature Lucy, and he found 40% of the skeleton over a relatively small area. I think he said 70 square meters is the way he described it. If I'm not mistaken on that, I don't know. But I named it Lucy because of the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. In National Geographic in 1985, an article appeared about Lucy. They pointed to this knee joint, the bottom part of the upper thigh bone and the upper part of the lower leg bone, the knee joint, and said this was Lucy's knee. Now actually, this particular knee joint was found a year earlier. It was found 1.5 miles away and 200 feet or 70 meters deeper in a totally different layer of strata. This knee joint, National Geographic labeled it Lucy's knee. 5 times they called it Lucy's knee. Now Donald Johansen, when he speaks on the topic, is very careful not to call it Lucy's knee, because it's obviously not. You know, it's found 1.5 miles away. But Tom Willis of the Creation Ministry in Kansas City area has a great article about Lucy's knee joint, and we'll get you some copies of this. Lucy remains at college. You can get a hold of Tom Willis and get all sorts of details on what really happened with Lucy's knee. Tom Willis went to hear Donald Johansen speak, and Donald Johansen was taking questions at the end. So there were no questions with 800 people there, so Tom volunteered to ask him a few questions. You know, was that really Lucy's knee? You know, and why did you allow National Geographic to call it this 5 times when it wasn't Lucy's knee? You're allowing this fraud to be perpetuated when it's really not. But the reason they like this one to be part of Australopithecine is because the bones are slightly bigger than an ape. On the far right, you'll see the bones of an ape, which are straight in a straight line. The lower leg and the upper leg line up. On a human, your thigh bone is angled because your hips are wider than your knees in your normal stance, because we walk upright, whereas an ape that walks on all fours or bent over they have different bone structure in their leg. And so your thigh bone is angled coming off of the knee joint. This one that they called Lucy's knee, actually the Hadar knee, was also angled. He said this proves it's becoming a human. Tom Willis's number is right there, 816-618-3610. If you want to get hold of Tom Willis, he's got plenty of material on Lucy, and really gives them fits over this because they're simply lying to try to claim all this is a missing link. But they're so desperate for evidence for their evolution theory that any evidence is good enough. You know, we'll take it, we'll use it. He said because the femur was angled, that proves it is becoming a human and learning to walk upright. See, one of the millions of changes that would have to happen between an ape and a human is it'd have to go from walking on 4 legs, mostly. Chimpanzees can walk on 2 sometimes, but it's uncomfortable for them because of the way their hip is built and their back is built. They're more comfortable walking on 4. Plus their fingers and toes curl under. They're called knuckle walkers. If you watch a chimpanzee walking, you know, they walk on their knuckles like this. They don't walk flat on the bottom of their feet or hands like we would. They have the toes curled under. The femur was angled on this one they found 1.5 miles away that some claimed was Lucy's when it really wasn't. The truth of the matter is, any monkey that climbs trees has angled femurs. It's called abhoral, how do you pronounce that, Jan? You the English, you know, tree dwelling. Abhoral, living in trees. Tree dwelling monkeys have angled femurs. So it's not proof it's becoming a human. It could be just a tree climbing monkey that he found the bones of. Secondly, his claim was Lucy's knee was slightly bigger than a regular ape. Well, that doesn't prove a thing, of course, you know. The bones of a Clydesdale are slightly bigger than a regular horse. That does not prove it is becoming a truck. It's just a heavy-duty chimpanzee, that's all. And if the Bible is correct, before the flood came, the world was very different. People were living longer and probably growing bigger, and it makes sense that probably everything was bigger and stronger before the world was destroyed by that flood in the days of Noah. So Lucy is not a missing link at all. The St. Louis Zoo has a display up, a wax figure of Lucy. Now you got to understand, Lucy is 3 feet 6 inches tall. So when you go to the zoo, and I've been there many times, every time I go to St. Louis, I go there just to keep my blood boiling because of all the lies in that crazy place, trying to push evolution. For instance, when you walk in to this one section of the zoo, they've got Charles Darwin sitting behind a desk in his little office. And it's a mechanical thing, and he stands up and begins talking to you about evolution. And the whole zoo seems to be devoted to pushing this one theory of evolution. Why on earth does a zoo have to talk about evolution? Why can't you go look at the animals, you know? But they think they have to use the zoo to teach the boys and girls who come about evolution, and that's what they're doing at many zoos across the country. But actually, for Lucy, not one foot bone or hand bone was found. None. But on St. Louis Zoo's wax figure, they put human feet and human hands. No bones at all were actually found. Other Australopithecines that have been found all had curled toes. They were obviously knuckle walkers. And their big toe was separated from their other toes, indicating it's called a grasping foot, where they can actually grab a tree branch with their foot. You can't do that because your toes all line up, and you know, your big toe and other toes line up. But all the other Australopithecines had this grasping foot with a toe separation. But the St. Louis Zoo put Lucy with human feet on there. There's no telling how many hundreds of thousands of kids go through this thing and see this every year and are impressed with the idea, wow, they have evidence for evolution. And it's just pure propaganda. That's not evidence for evolution. A professor from Washington University said, the statue is a complete misrepresentation. And I believe they know it is a misrepresentation. That is a fancy word that means a lie. The zoo director of education, Bruce Carr, said, zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. I don't know if there's a pun intended there or not, but certainly would be one. He said, we cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct. Now, excuse me, Bruce, what impression are you trying to get across to these kids? Are you trying to make them believe there's evidence that apes turn to humans or ape-like creatures turn to humans? Is that what you're trying to make the kids believe? Well, if you really have some evidence for evolution, I would like to see it. I'm not against evidence. I'm against lying, and this is lying. That's not evidence for evolution. The Laetoli footprints that were found were perfectly normal human footprints. All of the articles that came out about this time, they found footprints in the ash that had hardened, the ash from a volcano. Somebody had walked across it and left footprints, and it hardened, sort of like concrete would do. Well, these footprints were in rock supposed to be 3.75 million years old. Now this creates a problem, since those folks who believe in evolution have been teaching man did not evolve until probably about 1 to 2 million years ago. And here we have ash that they have dated at 3.75 million years old. We will get into later on on seminar part 7 of how they do the dating of these ash layers, and it's absolutely ridiculous how they date this with potassium-argon dating and the wild numbers they get. But see, the theory supersedes all the evidence in their mind. There's a great chapter in the end of this book called The Dating Game, showing how the dates can be changed whenever the need arises. You know, to make, if a potassium-argon or carbon date doesn't fit the theory, well, you simply change it, you know. They can date it again as many times as necessary to get the number they were looking for to begin with, which is not science, and I don't understand how they can't see that. But they said this proves hominids were walking upright 3.75 million years ago. Because here you have normal human footprints. Now they measure numerous things about the footprint. The width compared to the length, this what's called the straddle, how far apart are the right footprints and the left footprints, the toe out, you know, caster and camber like you do on a car, you know, the stride. By measuring everything about these footprints, they say they're perfectly normal, exactly like ours. But yet they said this proves hominids. Now why would they call it a hominid? Why didn't they say humans? Why don't they say this proves humans were here 3.75 million years ago? Now the truth is that layer of ash is not 3.75 million years old. That's all baloney. We'll get into that later. But even if they're right, by their own thinking, they should say, wait a minute, we found normal human footprints. This would be made by a normal human. Maybe that proves man's always been man, but they don't seem to consider that possibility. They said the form of his foot was exactly the same as ours. This is from National Geographic, talking about these footprints. It says, weight-bearing pressure patterns in the prints resemble human ones, footprints so very much like our own. Russell Tuttle, University of Chicago, did the most extensive study of the Laetoli footprints, as well as studying the footprints of more than 70 habitually unshod people, people who go all their life with no shoes. He found the 3.5 million year old footprint trails at Laetoli Site G resemble those of habitually unshod modern humans. None of their features suggest that the Laetoli hominids were less capable bipeds than we are. What he's saying is, you compare these footprints with people who traditionally go without shoes, they look the same. He said if the G footprints were not known to be so old, we could readily conclude they were made by a member of our own genus, Homo. Now, do you understand how the evolution prejudice destroys their normal thinking process? If you walked along the beach and found some human footprints along the beach, you would conclude that a human just walked there in the sand, obviously, right? Here they find normal human footprints in the ash, but because they've already decided this layer is too old, therefore, we know it can't be human, but all the evidence says it was. But see, it goes against the preconceived idea. And this is an example, one of millions of examples that can be given of how evolution theory is protected against any evidence that might go against it. You would think a rational, logical thinking person would say, you know, maybe we should throw out the theory. Normally in science, you get a theory, you gather evidence. If your evidence contradicts your theory, you throw the theory away and you get a new theory. That's the way it happens in all branches of science except paleontology when it comes to defending the theory of evolution. National Geographic drew a picture of dark-skinned, ape-like people on top of these footprints. Now understand, all they found were footprints. How would you know the color of their skin? One evolutionist got all upset with me and said, well, that's because this is Africa. They're dark-skinned over there. Well, maybe so. But maybe this is a slight racial slam trying to imply that dark-skinned people are less evolved. Hitler certainly believed that. Hitler thought the blacks were inferior. to the Aryans, you know, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegians and Germans. And we'll get into more of that much later on seminar part 5 of my series on how Hitler's philosophy and racism tie together in evolution. But also, the artist for this picture for National Geographic in 1979 drew the footprints with a toe separation, trying to imply it is starting to become a grasping foot. See, your footprint, you couldn't grasp a tree branch and hang upside down with your big toe on one side and your other toes on the other side. Monkeys can, of course. And they drew this picture by making the toe a little further over than was actually found, making a little separation. This is called propaganda in my book. I think they should report the facts, and if it contradicts your theory, well then for heaven's sake, throw away the theory and get a new one. The problem is, many people like that evolution theory because it gives them freedom from God. And I'm convinced, after studying this topic for 30-some years, that's the reason they keep that evolution theory. Charles Oxnard studied every one of the Lucy bones. He measured every angle or every dimension of the bones and compared them. It's called a multivariate analysis. He spent, I believe, 16 years studying Lucy. He said, folks, the various Australopithecines, which is Lucy, are indeed more different from both African apes and humans in most features than these latter are from each other. In other words, Lucy is more different from humans and apes than apes are from humans. It's not a missing link at all. It's just an unusual monkey, that's all. So if anybody tells you Lucy is a missing link, you need to tell them they're misinformed. Or they're lying. I don't know of a nicer way to say it, but that's just the way it goes, okay? There could be some Lucy-type monkeys, a monkey that traditionally or commonly walks on 2 legs and consequently has a slightly different hip structure. There could be some still alive. It's just a monkey is all it is. I mean, several birds, most birds walk on 2 legs, you know, have an upright posture. The fact that if it walks on 2 legs does not prove it is starting to become a human. It proves God made a species of monkeys that walks on 2 legs part of the time, or most of the time even. But that Creation magazine is excellent magazine. Back in '96, they had a good article about, you know, is Lucy still alive? Down in Sumatra, which is down near Vietnam area, Indonesia. Experts will tell you there is really no evidence of how man evolved. By the time you get done reading this book, Bones of Contention by Marvin Lubenow, now, what Lubenow does in here, he spent 25 years studying all of the so-called missing links. Has a section on each one in here. He says at the beginning of the book, he says, I'm going to assume that their dating, I'm going to go by their dates that they give to these missing links, okay? If they say it's 1.6 million years old, okay, we're going to believe them. He said, I don't believe any of that stuff, but we're going to go by their teaching. And so just by their own teaching, he shows that the dates are totally wrong. They overlap each other. You have the children existing before the grandparents. You know, by the way that they say they evolved, it just doesn't work. So it really is an interesting expose on that topic. I recommend you read that one for all the lowdown on the so-called missing links. The only missing link I've been able to find is modern man. He's definitely got something missing between his ears. He thinks we came from an ape-like ancestor. He spends all his spare time digging in the dirt looking for bones. My dog does the same thing, but we don't make the taxpayers pay his salary while he does it. It'd be the major difference. But they seem to be so desperate to worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, just like Romans chapter 1 says. These folks really don't like the idea of God creating the world. The Bible says they profess themselves to be wise, but they're fools. It's a shame. And they are not the enemy. Those who believe in evolution are not the enemy. We need to love them and pray for them and witness to them, and they can be saved like anybody else. They're blinded by the devil. I'm convinced of that. I was in a debate several months ago, and this professor was up there saying, folks, we've got proof for evolution. We found this fossil. You know, it wasn't Lucy, it was another one. We found this fossil, and this proves man came from an ape-like ancestor. When it was my turn, I got up and I said, folks, I'd like to point out the obvious. If this was a court of law, and this guy came in and says, Judge, we have evidence that apes turned to humans, and here's the fossil we found in the dirt. I would say, Your Honor, it's pretty obvious. If you find a fossil in the dirt, all you know is it died. You don't know that it had any kids, do you? You find a skeleton in the dirt. You don't know that it had any kids. You certainly don't know that it had different kids. And why do they think the bones in the dirt can do something the animals today cannot do? Every kind of animal in the world produces after its kind. Humans have humans. Apes have apes. Chimpanzees have chimpanzees. If they think an ape-like creature could produce a human in the past, well, why don't they have an ape-like creature produce a human again? Only let's study it this time. I mean, I want to see it happen. It only happens long ago and far away, which is fairy tale material. Evolution doesn't happen. No animal has ever produced anything other than its kind. Now, you don't want to use the word species when you get into discussions with them. Just stick with the word kind and you'll be safe. Okay, we'll take a little break, and when we come back, we'll talk about where does the Stone Age fit into the Bible. What about the Stone Age coming up next? Where does the Stone Age fit into the Bible? Was there a time when civilizations existed with mostly stone tools as opposed to iron or copper or brass or bronze or some of the things we use today? Well, I would point out there are people today who use stone tools. There are what we would call Stone Age civilizations all over the world because that's all that's available to them. I think if there was a general Stone Age for the whole world, it would have been right after the flood, because the flood destroyed everything. When the people got off of that ark, they opened the door and walked out, and there's nothing. Everything had been ruined. I mean, you figure they stayed in the ark about 6 months after they hit bottom. How tall would the trees be by the time they walked out the door? You know, this tall maybe? Seeds floating around do just fine, you know, float around in water for a few months and then germinate, but probably the extra 6 months, I mean, you can plant just about any vegetable and get it up to eatable size in a few months. You know, I don't know what garden lengths are. I know up north it's a little faster because they have longer days than they do down here. So though they have shorter growing season because the days are longer, they end up getting their fruit in or getting their crops in earlier. But so in 6 months, you'd have plenty to eat outside for the animals. So that's probably why they stayed in 6 more months. There's simply no reason to go outside. Nothing out there to eat. But they got off the ark and faced just a ruined world. And so you don't tell your grandson, our fax ed, to go to the hardware store and get you a shovel. There aren't any hardware stores. There aren't any shovels. There's nothing. There is no civilization. Gone. It's got going and landing on the moon. So, you know, it's going to take a while to figure out where the iron ore deposits are, you know, where the gold deposits are and silver deposits and copper deposits. You got to find this stuff, the ore in the ground. Meanwhile, you're going to get hungry. And it takes a while to dig out iron ore, melt it down, and, you know, make iron tools out of it or steel tools. It takes a while to do that. So, meanwhile, you got to have supper. So it makes common sense that you're going to go make some stone tools, which are much quicker, take some hard rock, chip it sharp, you know, and make stone arrowheads or whatever. So probably they faced what I would call a Gilligan's Island situation. Maybe other people in other parts of the world have not seen the video or the movie about Gilligan's Island. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen that, where they're on a ship, you know, and the storm blows them off course, and they land on an island, and they end up, this crew of 8 or 9 people have to live there for years and years and years till the show becomes unpopular and then they take it off the air. But there's nothing to work with. So you have to use stone or bamboo or whatever you can find to make your house, to make your tools, to mortar and pestle. Everything has to be done out of stone. And plus, if you're a nomad society traveling around from area to area, you got to carry everything with you. So now you don't want to have, you know, a bunch of stuff to haul around with you if it's heavy, because whatever you got to carry it. So they would tend to minimize their tools. Now the Aborigines in Australia, even today, some of them are nomadic. They wander around. So they don't carry any tools. So they use their teeth as a vise. And, you know, if you're going to strip the bark off a tree branch, you clamp it down in your teeth while you hold it. Well, that tightens up the masseter muscles. You're always using your teeth. That's your favorite tool. That's your pliers. That's everything, you know. And so the masseter muscle gets bigger just from use so much, you know, like a bodybuilder. And any bodybuilder will tell you the more you use a muscle, the more it pulls on the bone, and pretty soon the body responds by building more bone mass there. So the bones actually get bigger. So Aborigines typically have bigger jaws and a different shaped face than ours. And it's nothing to do with evolution. That's a bodybuilder. They're using their jaws more. That's all it is. And somehow they get this idea that 100 years ago, people were shooting the Aborigines, killing them like cows, thinking they're just, you know, a missing link and they're, you know, they haven't evolved as far, and it really would be better for the world if we wiped them out. In 1904 at the St. Louis Zoo, where the zoo is today, they had a World's Fair there. 1904 is held in St. Louis. They had a display. A section of the zoo was set up with all pygmies, with their pygmy huts and, you know, fires and families living there, as an evolution display to show they hadn't evolved as far. One fella, Ota Benga his name is, was taken away from his wife and 2 kids and put in a cage with chimpanzees as evidence for evolution. The guy's a little pygmy, about 4'5" or something like that. He went insane and killed himself. We'll cover a lot more on that in seminar part 5 about the philosophy of evolution, what happens. But before the flood, things are doing great, you know, even though the world had been cursed. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us when the curse was, you know, when Adam sinned. I suspect they probably lived in the garden for 100 years. Just for sake of argument, let's assume the only facts we have to go on as far as when Adam and Eve sinned and were kicked out of the garden. Here's the only facts we have. Adam was 130 when Seth was born. Before that, they had 2 kids, Cain and Abel, but no dates are given. They were out of the garden before any kids were born. So they could have easily been in the garden for 100 years before they sinned. I think some people tend to read the Bible and say, wow, you know, God made them, and they sinned immediately. I can't buy that, okay? Could have been 100 years later that they disobeyed God, and then the ground is cursed. What we have from the curse is just a few clues in the Bible. Thorns and thistles are going to come up. It's going to be pain in childbearing, and it's about all you're going to get from the Scriptures. You're going to have to work for a living now. So apparently something changed. Now, God gave a lot of commands to these people in the garden before the flood. He told them to eat all vegetables and plants. We'll see that later on, Genesis 1:30, 29 and 30. All the animals were vegetarian. They were supposed to be. But that doesn't mean everything was obeying God. I mean, the reason we had that flood is because they were disobedient. So the fact that God told them to do something a certain way does not mean that they were. I mean, I hope they were, but apparently somebody wasn't, because God had to come down and destroy the whole world. But before the flood came, under this canopy that the earth had, we talked about that in the last class, the canopy of water is probably the best theory, though it's not provable, probably the best theory to explain why things were so different before the flood. Rhinoceros was found in Nebraska, a hornless rhinoceros, 18 feet tall. We figure this ceiling in here is 12 feet tall. 6 feet higher than the ceiling. That's a big rhinoceros. It was 30 feet long. This room is 32 feet wide. That's a big rhino, okay? Now the textbooks will tell the kids this is a prehistoric animal. Now this is interesting. The word prehistoric was just invented in the last 100 years or so. I got some old dictionaries to look up the word prehistoric. Somebody sent me one from 1766. Dictionary of the English Language. When I went to look up prehistoric, it wasn't there. So if you had seen somebody during the time of the Revolution here in America and said, what do you think about the prehistoric times? Well, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. There's no such thing. Because in their mind, history starts at the creation. And the world is 6,000 years old. That's what they believed. In 1860, during the Civil War, if you had asked Robert E. Lee, what do you think about prehistoric times? There was no such word. The word did not exist. Darwin's book came out in 1859. Now, there were people before 1859 who believed the earth was millions of years old. But the majority of the population believed the Bible was right, the earth is about 6,000 years old. Because that's what the dates add up to if you figure it out. You know, that's what it says. I haven't been able to find the exact year the word prehistoric was added. If you want to do that, send it to me and let me know. Somebody sent me a 1928 dictionary. It is in there. That's the earliest one we can find it in, and the last one I've seen that we can't find it in is 1860. So somewhere during that time frame, I would guess around 1900, the word prehistoric was added to the dictionary. Now there really is no such thing as prehistoric. There is no such thing. See, the Bible says, in the beginning. Well, how do you go before that? There are things that are pre-flood, but that is not prehistoric. So don't fall for that. I think before the flood, if there was a canopy overhead, it would increase air pressure. Now, increased air pressure changes the size of insects you can have. This dragonfly fossil was found that has a 3-foot wingspan. That's a big dragonfly. How'd you like to run into that thing at about 70 miles an hour? You take the bug deflector and the hood right off and come on through the windshield and join you in the front seat. They just were huge. Now, insects breathe through their skin through what's called spiracles. They don't have lungs and nostrils like we do. They have to absorb oxygen through their skin, which means the larger an insect gets, the more volume it has to its body compared to its surface area. We'll go explain that just a little bit. All right, let's talk about what happens as any object becomes larger. This is something, I don't know what the technical name for it is, but it's the surface area to volume ratio, and it changes. I'll show you how this works. Let's take a cube that is 1 inch on all sides, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. So the side is 1. The volume is 1 cubic inch. How many square inches of surface are required to make a cube like that? 6. You have 6 square inches, like a dice has 6 sides on it. So you have 6 square inches of surface area. So my volume, my ratio of my surface area compared to the volume is 6 to 1. You follow me? This 1 cubic inch of material has 6 square inches to absorb things through. If it was an insect, it has 6 square inches of skin through which it can absorb oxygen to supply 1 cubic inch of body. Let's change it to 2. 2 inches by 2 inches by 2 inches. Our side is now 2. What is our volume? 8. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. What is our surface area? Each side is 4, and there are 6 sides, so it's 24, right? What is our surface area to volume ratio? 24 to 8, which reduces to 3 to 1. So by doubling the size, we now effectively only have half as much skin that you can absorb oxygen through. Anybody follow me on that? They have 8 times more body, but only 3 times more skin. So they are losing out. If they have to absorb something through the skin to supply all that internal tissue, they simply don't have enough skin anymore. As it gets larger, the problem gets worse. As you get smaller, the problem becomes much better for an animal that has to absorb through the skin. The other thing that happens, if something is depending on friction with the wind, like an ant falling out of a tree, if an ant falls out of the tree, he's got his own parachute built in because he's got so much surface area and so little volume. He's mostly surface area, so he's got lots of friction with the wind, so he falls, hits the ground, and walks off. Doesn't hurt him. You can drop ants out of an airplane. They can fall 10 miles, and well, airplanes don't go 10 miles, but they hit the ground and walk off. It doesn't faze them because they fall so slowly. Whereas the bigger a person is, the less surface area to volume ratio they have, and so you just simply don't get enough friction with the wind, and you and I can't fall out of an airplane and survive unless we're really lucky. There have been people who fall out without a parachute and survive, but I wouldn't want to try it personally. Now, since an insect has to absorb through its skin oxygen, the bigger it gets, the more this becomes a problem. So there's a maximum size insects can get based upon how much air pressure there is. But if you increase the air pressure, now they don't need quite as much skin because they're getting, say, twice as much oxygen through every square inch of skin, so they can survive just fine. That explains why we find some absolutely gigantic insects. Cockroaches today get, 2 inches long as a big cockroach. We have them all over Florida here, right? But yet 18-inch cockroaches have been found in the fossil record. How'd you like to find those under the kitchen cabinet, Can you imagine a 1.5 foot long, a half-meter cockroach? A friend of mine, Fred Gayford up in Canada, does video and does graphics and artwork and editing and stuff like that. And he put this picture together for me. He also speaks on creation. He sends me a lot of pictures that he does like this. That's his wife about to swat that 18-inch long cockroach. I'm glad they don't get that big. I mean, they're bad enough around here. Up north in Illinois, where I'm from, cockroaches are, 3/4 of an inch long, no big deal, But down here, well, you're in the fruit business, you know about the cockroaches we've got. In Germany, they found an 8.5 foot long centipede fossil. Can you imagine? That's a big centipede. There's Fred, going to shoot it with his shotgun. But that's a giant centipede. Now, when you consider the surface area to volume ratio problem they would have, one of those, thankfully, could not survive today. I believe there are some 12-inch centipedes today in the world. Maybe some bigger than that, I don't know, in some of the jungles and things like that. But even 12 inches is a big centipede. But 8.5 feet is lots bigger. I suspect these type insects could not survive today, and this is one of the evidences that something was different before the flood came. I think the pre-flood world had to have more air pressure precisely because of the surface area to volume problem. All right, there are some good creationists who do not agree with the canopy theory. I spent quite a bit of time talking to Walt Brown, who's a great guy, has a tremendous book, In the Beginning. He lives in Phoenix, Arizona. Met me at the airport when I was there a few months ago, and we had dinner or lunch together. He does not think there was a canopy. He thinks there are some problems with the theory. I listened to his problems. I've listened to them before from other people, and I think there's a solution to it. And I asked him, well, what about the giant insects? How do you explain that? He said, well, we don't have an answer to that one. That's why I think this is really a powerful evidence that there must have been something to increase air pressure before the flood came, and the canopy so far is the best available theory for what that might have been. Grasshoppers have been found that are 2 feet long. These are fossils of grasshoppers. When you consider they not only have to get oxygen to their skin to survive, they have to fly. Now, flight takes an enormous amount of energy and a lot more oxygen than just walking does. So they'd have to have something very different about the grasshoppers. Cattail fossils have been found that are 60 feet tall. You figure, a 6-story building. That's a big cattail. Just what's called, they call it a cone, the brown part on the cattail is called the cone. Just the cone is 10 feet long, as high as these pillars. That's the cone on these cattails that are found fossilized. A donkey was found in Lubbock, Texas that was 9 feet high at the shoulder. Again, the pillar's 10 feet tall for comparison, so figure 9 feet to the shoulder of the donkey. Buffalo horns have been found that have a 12-foot horn span. That would be a big buffalo. The core to this buffalo horn, see, cows and buffalo have the bony part in the middle, and then they have the horn sheath on the outside. The horn is actually longer than the bony part inside. It's called the core, the horn core. And Carl Baugh has the horn core up in his museum. If you're ever going across Texas, you can stop and see Carl Baugh's museum in Glen Rose, where this horn core is. The horn core is 8 feet. So the buffalo had 12-foot horn. I tell folks, you show me a home where that buffalo roams, and I'll show you a wreck. That would have been a disaster. Beaver fossils are found indicating they got 8 feet long. I was preaching up at Maranatha Baptist Bible College in Wisconsin, and I stopped in Johnson Creek, Wisconsin, just north of the Illinois border, and I met Jim Erb. There's his phone number. Jim was working on his farm, digging something with a tractor, and found this beaver jaw, fossilized. They dug around, did not find anything. They didn't find the rest of the beaver. All they found was the lower jaw. They dug around for a while. Some university professors came out there and dug for a while, couldn't find the rest of it. But there's other indications around the world that beavers were absolutely huge. This beaver would have been about 8 feet long. And if the world before the flood was vastly different with much larger trees, you would need much larger beavers to chew them down. Everything was kept balanced back in those days also, just like God takes care of everything. Increasing air pressure also increases the amount of oxygen that diffuses into the water. Our little fish pond out here, we have a fountain that's bubbling to try to add oxygen to the water. Because fish have to breathe underwater. You know, they suck the water through their gills, and the gills absorb the oxygen and get it into their bloodstream. Well, eventually, pond water can become stagnant, and the fish will all die because they've used up all the oxygen in there. But if you increase air pressure, more oxygen goes into the water. Which means, if the world had greater air pressure, it would not only increase the size of the insects and increase the size of the trees, it would increase the size of the fish and the number of fish that can survive per cubic mile of ocean water. Because now there's more oxygen available, which means everything changes, okay? Lots more things grow in the water, and lots more fish eat those things, and so there's less competition for food, so you get a larger population that can survive in a given area. Today, you know, farmers out in South Dakota, for instance, you have to have about 10 acres to raise one cow. Whereas you get down here in Florida, you only have to have, say, 1 acre to raise 2 cows. You know, half acre supplies enough grass for a cow. I don't know what the ratio is, but that's the idea. You have just more food available. What if you had a pre-flood world that had greater air pressure, greater carbon dioxide, you get much more plants growing, many more plants growing per acre. Now the animal population can skyrocket, and it's not a problem. There's no competition for food. Which means there wouldn't have to be any carnivorous animals. As long as there's plenty of food, the animals don't fight. If there's plenty of food around, there's no reason to be upset about it, you know. It's only when things get tight, you know, that they start to argue and bicker and fight over things. A shark's jaw, like this one, you can tell roughly the size of the shark by how big the teeth are. And it's different for different species of sharks, and there's probably 80 or 100 different species of sharks, or varieties of sharks, but generally the rule is a 1-inch tooth means the shark was 12 to 15 feet long. When I was in Hawaii, we went over to the Big Island to see the volcano. You were with us, Marlissa, weren't you, on that one? And we bought this shark's jaw, and the guy said it came from about a 15-foot shark. Now, sharks have all cartilage. They don't have any bones in their body, except for the teeth. Well, it's not really bone, but that's the hard part. So the rest of the, you know, shark's teeth are about the only thing you ever find preserved. The rest of them rots because it's just cartilage. They don't have a bony structure. This one was dried out. I've got it in the office down there, the shark's jaw. But about 12 to 15 feet for 1 inch of tooth. Now, fossil shark's teeth are found, indicating sharks got to be 80 feet long before the flood. Can you imagine an 80-foot shark? You could walk right into the jaw easily, standing up. One fellow said, "Do you believe Jonah was swallowed by a whale?" Oh, yeah. Well, actually, the Bible says great fish, but could have been a whale. I don't know. I'm not sure if whales in God's classification system it appears that whales are classified as fish. Anything lives in the water is a fish. Just because we've decided to classify whales and dolphins as mammals, and you know, by our classification system they are, that doesn't mean the Bible system is wrong. They just had a different system of way of classifying things. But Jonah was swallowed by something that was awful big. The Bible says God prepared this creature to swallow Jonah. God had prepared a great fish, so may have been something special about it, I don't know. But, you know, this one's big enough to swallow a Volkswagen, certainly big enough to swallow a man. If you get J. Vernon McGee's book, commentary on Jonah, you're J. Vernon McGee, the guy on the radio, you know, this is J. Vernon McGee, you know, God bless you, my beloved. You know, he's been long dead now, but if you get his book on Jonah and read this commentary, he goes through several instances where people or animals have been swallowed and lived, swallowed by a whale and lived. Was that story on the radio this morning about that? Yeah. Some guy named Bartlett washed overboard on a ship and was swallowed and found 2 days later alive, bleached out. His skin never did recover. The rest of his life he looked pretty weird, you know, is the way I understand it. It happened in 1890-something or something, a whaling ship. But he tells that story on there. So sharks were bigger. Turtles, evidence is found that turtles were huge before the flood. This one is in Peabody Museum, which is in Yale University in Connecticut, showing a turtle about 12 feet, maybe 13 or 14 feet. I don't know how long the tail was. That would be a large turtle. Birds fossils. Now birds don't fossilize easily because their bones are hollow. Because bird bones are hollow, which gives them really more strength and less weight. If you notice bridges, the structure of bridges is often full of holes. It relieves some of the weight and adds more surface area. It goes into another physical problem of if you take a piece of solid pipe and bend it, if you drilled a hole all the way through the middle of the pipe, a hollow pipe would be harder to bend because it has more surface area. Less mass, but more surface area, and actually is harder to bend. So oftentimes, hollow is stronger. Any engineer that builds bridges will tell you, yeah, that's right, you know, hollow can be stronger. And bird bones are hollow, which means they're less likely to fossilize. They're more likely to just crumble, you know, get smashed or something like that. But in spite of that obvious difficulty, bird fossils have been found, indicating they got about 13 feet tall. Now there were some birds that were on the islands of New Zealand and maybe Australia, even 800 years ago, that the Maori people over there, the Maori Indians, were killing them and eating them. And these birds were 8 or 10 feet tall. Giant birds were alive on Earth just, you know, 800 or 900 years ago. And they were killing them on these islands. Apparently they've all gone extinct now. Though there are some people arguing that they're not extinct on some of the Pacific islands. Well, you know, who knows? They find some eggs of these things that are enormous. These huge eggs have been found over the last 100 years. Somebody thinks, you know, they're still alive. I don't know. That gets into the cryptozoology study of giant birds. You can read it for yourself and see what you think. Reptiles, lizards, never stop growing. Reptiles grow all their life. Now, people stop growing. What happens, the ends of your bones in your body have a certain type of cell that keeps multiplying and reproducing, and when you reach a certain size, that stops. If you break your arm or your leg at the joint when you're a child, if you break across those special cells that continue to grow, there's a possibility your arm or leg will be actually shorter than it should be because you broke it during childhood while it's in the growth stage. You can break your arm in other places and it won't affect the length of it, but if you break it across those special cells that are continually growing, you know, you may end up with a short arm or something for the rest of your life. Okay, who cares? Anyway, reptiles never stop growing. They grow all their life. When we went to Orlando, I was with Eric, I know. Marlissa, were you with on that trip? We went to Alligator Farm? Okay. We stopped at the alligator farm where they raise alligators for, you know, they eat them and, you know, make stuff out of their skin and stuff like that. I talked to the manager. He took me and showed me all the stuff around there and got me into the back sides and saw, not part of the normal tour. I made friends with him and I said, sir, can you tell me, how big do these things get? How fast do they grow? He said, well, we raise them here under what we consider as close to ideal conditions as we can. You know, plenty of food, perfect climate, you know, we watch for diseases, and we keep all the ones the same age together. So there's no bully in the bunch. They're all the same age, growing together, so there's less fighting that way. Whereas if you have one 14-foot alligator with a bunch of 3-foot alligators, you know, they don't have much of a chance of survival. So we keep them separated by their age group. He said, under these pretty close to ideal conditions, we can get an alligator from an egg in 1 year to 5 feet long. He said the second year, they get up to 7 feet long. So 0 to 5 feet, and then 5 feet to 7 feet. He said then the growth rate continues to slow down, but they never stop growing. They may grow a foot the next year, and 8 inches the next year, and 6 inches the next year, but they just simply never stop growing. Now, how big they get, of course, depends on numerous factors. Genetics, you know, what species is it, what type of alligator, food supply, disease, things like that. But regardless of all those things, the simple fact is they never stop growing. So if you put lizards in the pre-flood world and let them live to be 900 years old, it is known, for instance, that most reptiles live about as long as, reptiles can live as long as humans. The Galapagos turtles, have you seen those giant tortoises you see at the circus or at the zoos once in a while? They got these huge turtles. They know they live over 200 years. They suspect they might live 400 years, you know, but who's around to watch it, you know, for 400 years? If reptiles lived even longer than humans, then, of course, the problem becomes worse. But even if they only live to be 900 years, a reptile that never stops growing for 900 years is going to get to be a big lizard after a while. Dinosaurs were probably just giant reptiles that lived before the flood. They did not live millions of years ago. They're just big lizards that lived with Adam and Eve. Even today, reptiles never stop growing. When we first moved in here 11 years ago, I went around and met all the neighbors. Jan, do you remember the folks down the street that had the pet shop? They raised pets to sell. Just where they tore it's in a trailer down there. They've tore it down now. It's where the PCC print shop is. But I went down and knocked on the door, and the guy said, "Come on in." So I walked in. As soon as I stepped in the kitchen, right in front of me was a 5-foot-long iguana. Just standing there looking at me. I held real still. I said, "Does he bite?" The guy said, "No, we just fed it." I said, "Man, how big's it going to get?" He said, "Oh, they never stop growing." He said, "I raise them right here and sell them to pet stores." I said, "What's the biggest one you've ever seen?" He said, "Oh, I've seen them 10 feet long. Iguanas." I went down 6 months later, knocked on the door. "Hey, how's the iguana doing?" He said, "Oh, we don't know." I said, "You don't know?" He said, "No, he got out." I said, "You mean like outside?" He said, "Yeah, he's around here in the neighborhood someplace. If you see it, give me a call, would you?" I said, "Forget it, man. I'm calling 911 if I see a 6-foot iguana crawling around the neighborhood." He never did find it. Now, he told me, he said it probably won't survive because it's been hand-fed all of its life. You know, it doesn't know how to hunt for food. Plus, some dog or herd of cats or something is going to, you know, worry this thing to death. And he said it's probably too big now to climb trees. Plus, it's certainly too out of shape to climb trees because we've been raising it in the kitchen all this time. But they just never stop growing. So I think before the flood, they got to be huge. You can buy these today, a Jackson chameleon. You can buy these at the pet store. They have 3 horns on their face. Now, something like that at 15 tons would probably resemble what we have as the Triceratops. Man and dinosaurs lived at the same time. The Bible says God made everything in 6 days, so he made dinosaurs at the same time. Human and dinosaur bones have been found together, proving they lived together. Human and dinosaurs are found together on artwork. In Peru, they find humans and dinosaurs together on what are called the Ica stones. Dr. Ball has a couple of the stones. Don Patton has some in Texas, both friends of mine. Dr. DeCara in south of Lima, Peru, collects these stones. He has a museum of them. He has 11,000 of them in his museum. About 50,000 have been found. They're called the Ica stones. Now, let me tell you the story about the Ica stones and show you what the propaganda, what the opponents are going to say about this. These stones were apparently first really discovered by the Spanish conquistadors back in 1570. When they came through this area, they found these stones with strange animals. Now, the Spanish didn't know what they were. Turns out there's dinosaurs carved on these rocks. And the Spanish found them, you know, over 400 years ago and reported them, but didn't know what they were. But let's finish up on these Ica stones here. When they were first discovered, the Spanish didn't know what they were. They just said, "We found some strange animals carved on rocks. We've never seen these animals before." So they didn't, you know what to say about them. Then, in 1961, people began finding more of these things and collecting them, just as kind of a local phenomena in Peru. Now, you have to understand, Peru has a lot of ancient history. The Inca, not Ica, Inca Indians, and some of these other Indian tribes down there, you know, have a lot of pottery and stuff. And if you're caught selling what's called the Peruvian national treasure without a permit, in other words, you got to pay the government, you know, so they get their cut out of it, you go to jail. A Peruvian jail sentence is the equivalent to an American death sentence. You go to jail, you last about 2 years down there. Just horrible conditions. So, one farmer who's been finding these stones on his property and selling them to Dr. DeCara, for instance, or other people, you know, souvenir hunters. "Wow, look at this rock with dinosaurs and humans on there." He's been selling these things. He's finding them. He doesn't tell people where he finds them because, of course, they're going to go steal them, you know, out of this grave. But he was put on TV in front of the camera, and they were interviewing him. Some media thing was saying, you know, "Tell us about these stones you have with dinosaurs and humans on there." Right behind the camera were 2 Peruvian police officers for him to say, "I'm finding them and selling them," so they could arrest him. So instead, the farmer stood on the camera and said, "Oh, I make these stones and sell them. It's a hobby of mine." So they said, "Would you please make some for us right here?" And so he carved one, and it was a horrible, like a child's picture compared to real artwork, you know. And nothing at all similar to these stones he's selling. Also, they analyzed these stones and found out they have an oxidized coating. Most materials, over time, they oxidize. It reacts to the oxygen in the air, and they develop a coating on it. Your car does the same thing. You know, the paint starts to lose its shine as it gets an oxidized coating, and use rubbing compound to get that off and shine it back up. Well, these stones have an oxidized coating that would take a minimum of 200 years to develop that much oxidation. So nobody's making these in the last 200 years. Now, why would anybody make 50,000 stones? Don't they have something else to do with their time than sit around and carve dinosaurs and humans together? The other interesting thing about these stones, we'll get into more of that later, is the dinosaurs that are on there have circles on the side. Nobody has ever seen dinosaur skin, because when you find a dinosaur in the ground, you find the bones. Okay, the rest is rotted away. So nobody knew for sure what dinosaur skin looked like until 1992 or 3, I believe. Somebody in Bolivia found fossilized dinosaur skin. And guess what? There were Rosetta patterns, circles. The scales were arranged in like nodules on the side. They actually had circles on them. There's no way they could have known that when they made these stones, because the skin was just discovered in the last 10 years. Carl Baugh has the piece of dinosaur skin in his museum in Texas, the one that was found. I met the missionary, I met the wife of the missionary, or the best friend of the missionary or something, who found it down in, I believe it was Bolivia or Peru. Bolivia, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, we'll get into more of that later. Okay, so that's about the dinosaurs and humans living together. Next class, we'll talk about dinosaur and human footprints. I've read all the controversy for and against this, and we're going to explain the whole thing about the truth, what I consider to be the truth about the dinosaur and human footprints in our next class. Thank you for joining us. All right, let's begin. This will be class number 2 of Creation Science 102. We're continuing where we left off. Last week we talked a little bit about the giant insects that are found. Who remembers a little bit from last week about the, what's a problem that with giant insects today? What would be a problem why they couldn't survive? Who remembers? Yes, sir?
Not enough atmospheric pressure.
Not enough pressure. What does the pressure have to do with the size of an insect?
They breathe through their skin.
They breathe through their skin, right, and they just don't have enough skin compared to the size, the volume of their body. Okay, now we're going to talk about what happened in Glen Rose, Texas. If you go to Dallas and head over to Fort Worth and drop south, west, about 45 miles, you'll see the town of Glen Rose, Texas. It's yellow there on the map. Glen Rose, small town, about 2,000 or 3,000 people, I believe. The river that runs right through town is called the Paluxy River. Now, the Paluxy is the second to the fastest moving river in Texas. They gauge rivers by how far they drop per mile. If it runs 1 mile, how far does it drop? The Mississippi, for instance, in 1 mile drops 8 inches. 8 inches of drop for a mile of river. The Paluxy drops 17 feet per mile. So it's, I don't know what the fastest one is, but it's the second to the fastest moving river in Texas. The problem with this type of river is when you get a lot of rain in a hurry, you get flash floods. These kind of rivers flood easily, and the Paluxy floods very easily, and they're working on projects about putting dams every so often to prevent this flash flooding. But in 1908, there was a flash flood in Paluxy. They said the water was 27 feet above flood stage, and it went roaring through the area and just destroyed the bottom of the river. Now, I've been to the Paluxy. You've not been there yet, have you, Eric? You need to go there sometime. Been there 3 times. The whole area is layers of limestone, which is a rock a little softer than concrete, but roughly similar to concrete. Thick layers of limestone all over this area. And the Paluxy River bed is on top of one of these layers of limestone. So the river is basically flat all the way across. Most rivers, as you walk in, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and then more shallow and more shallow. Oh, not the Paluxy. You jump in, and if it's 2 feet deep, it'll be 2 feet all the way across. That's the way the river is. Okay. Well, in 1908, this river flooded, and the water went roaring through there 27 feet above flood stage and ripped off a layer of limestone, about 2 feet thick. This layer of limestone that was pulled off on the bottom exposed another layer underneath. You can see there the people standing next to the exposed layer, just about a 2-foot drop in limestone there. The layer underneath contained thousands of dinosaur footprints. There were so many footprints there, they decided years later to make it a state park. But at first, in 1908, the local people, you know, it was kind of an oddity. Hey, come see the footprints here. And, you know, nobody knew much about it. They didn't care much about it. Outsiders in the rest of the world didn't know. In the early 30s, during the Depression, one of the work projects here in America to keep people working, to give them a job, they sent some people there to Paluxy River to chisel out large blocks of these footprints. The American Museum sent a group down there, headed by a guy named Roland T. Bird. Roland Bird was in charge of the project. They would sandbag the river, pump out the water, because it's generally, you know, only a foot deep or so. It's not a lot of water normally, except during rainy season. But if you go there in the summer, oftentimes it dries up completely. There's no water at all. But they sandbagged it, pumped the water out, found some sections of dinosaur tracks, and sawed them out. Now, they broke them up into hundreds and hundreds of pieces and numbered all the pieces, loaded these chunks onto a truck, took them to museums, and reassembled the pieces like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Took a long time to do this. Here's the guys, you can see them right behind this section of tracks they're about to chisel out. They reconstructed the tracks, you know, fixed all the seams that they had made, and put them in museums. Quite a few museums around America have sections of tracks, or at least a few tracks from the Paluxy River. One of the reasons for taking the tracks out of the river and putting them in a museum is Glen Rose is way out of the way. Not many folks go there. Okay? Better to have them in a museum where people can see them. Secondly, the river was going to continue to destroy these tracks. Erosion would ruin them eventually. And so this preserves them for people to see. Here's the famous photo of the little boy taking a bath in a dinosaur footprint. The Tommy Pendley photo, it's called. They said he was very reluctant when they said, would you like to take a bath? You know how little boys are about baths, but finally they said, well, you get to wear your clothes and get in the footprint. Oh, okay. So he sat down and they took this photo of Tommy sitting in the dinosaur footprint. Roland Bird went down there in 1930. He was the field explorer for the American Field Museum. He reported that there were 15 to 20-inch long, clearly defined human footprints. Now, they didn't make much, don't talk about this much anymore. Here's a copy of one of those footprints. Now, this one is pretty badly eroded, believe it or not. What you see are the little pock marks all over the footprint. Many of these footprints, when they were first discovered in the 1908 to 1930 era, they were so clear you could see what are called the dermal ridges. Your fingerprints have little raised areas of skin called the fingerprint. You have the same thing on your toes. Only they don't call them a fingerprint, it'd be a toe print or a dermal ridge. Some of these tracks were so clear you could actually see the dermal ridges on the foot. There was one trail of footprints across there. They called it the moccasin trail because it was so clear when it was originally exposed you could see the stitching where they sewed the moccasins together. Where they sewed the pieces of leather together to make their moccasins. It's just extremely clear tracks. Well, of course, within a few years, they began to look like this instead. The clarity begins to disappear. There have been all sorts of people go down there to study these footprints. This is a picture of the Taylor Trail taken by Don Patton. The picture was taken in 1999. Still, recognizable human footprints crossing right over a dinosaur trail. Some of the tracks are still visible. Now, what they've done to these tracks to make them show up like this, they say they're wet out. They dry the area out, and then they go through and find the depressions where the footprints are and pour them full of water. That way they show up better on the picture. I suppose it's theoretically possible to take water and paint an area to look like a footprint, even though it's not a depression. But these are the tracks that they have just filled in the low places, and it makes the shape of a human foot. If you put your foot in there on some of the smaller ones, it'll fit perfectly. I've been there 3 times and walked in them. It's pretty incredible. A guy who owned a lot of this property died, I'm going to say he probably died in 1990, I don't know, quite a while ago. His name was Emmett McFall. Emmett McFall owned a lot of the property where the river runs across. When I stopped there with my students from Texas, Longview, Texas, we took a bus over there to see these things. Emmett McFall gave us a tour around the riverbed and took us and showed us where the tracks are. And we walked in them. He's the one who sold me the toe bone that I have, the dinosaur toe bone. He had found some bones of dinosaurs. He had a whole bunch of strange stuff sitting on tables there that, you know, visitors could come and look at and buy. A real friendly guy. He took us out in the bus and showed us all these things. Well, these footprints have taken a lot of flack even from some creationists. So I want to give you the story of the footprints tonight so that when you speak on this, people will be able to tell you. One of the times that I was there in Texas, a guy came to meet us when we went to the local store to get some Coke or something, and he said, my name is Cecil Daughtery. I heard you're here looking at the footprints. I said, Cecil Daughtery, are you the one that wrote this book? He said, yes, I am. Dr. Cecil Daughtery was a chiropractor who lived there for 17 years in Glen Rose. He spent all of his spare time out photographing footprints, human and dinosaur footprints together. Some of the best pictures that we have of this area, and the whole story is in this book, The Valley of the Giants by Dr. Cecil Daughtery. The footprints, he has a map here showing where the different man tracks are located. Now the guy's a chiropractor. He knows a little bit about the human body and about stride, you know, how far your steps should be, and about the shape of your foot, you know, when you land on your heel, and how what a footprint should look like. I mean, this was his study for years. And he studied these things very carefully and was convinced they are indeed obvious human footprints. Then John Morris from Institute for Creation Research, Henry Morris's son, John Morris, spent a lot of time there and wrote this book, saying, yep, there are definitely human footprints there. I sat across the table from John Morris several years ago when I spoke at ICR, and I said, John, why did you withdraw your book? He no longer sells the book. He says, Brother Hovind, I've got a whole warehouse full of those books, and I'd love to be able to sell them. He said, but I just cannot in good conscience continue to support the footprint idea in Texas. There was a movie made called Footprints in Stone by, I forget which group made that movie, but that movie went around the circuit for a while showing the dinosaur and human footprints together, and then they withdrew their movie off the market. So you'll get some people who will give you some flack and say, oh, the creationists don't support those human footprint ideas anymore. Well, here's the points that I would make on this. You might want to write these down. Number one, nobody has ever found human and chicken footprints in the same rock strata. Does that prove humans and chickens did not live at the same time? Obviously not. Chickens are still alive today, right? So you don't need to find the footprints together, first of all. Number two, if a few dinosaurs are still alive, then you don't need to find their footprints together. Okay? So the whole idea is sort of a moot point. It doesn't matter in one sense whether there's footprints or not. I believe there are, and I'll get into my evidence for that. But we don't have to find their footprints together to prove they live together. If we find dinosaurs on artwork, like we showed last week about the Ica stones, and we'll get into a lot more on that later about dinosaurs, I think there's obvious evidence from many lines of reasoning that they live together. We certainly have the scripture which teaches us God made everything in 6 days. So the Bible would indicate very clearly that everything was made at the same time and man lived with dinosaurs. So I think the whole argument about the human footprints and dinosaur footprints, though it is still very legitimate, is unnecessary in one sense to prove our point. Okay. I asked John Morris why they withdrew their support, and he said, well, our best human footprint turned into a dinosaur track. Here's what happened. On the back of this book, Texas Tracks and Artifacts, is a drawing, our artist's conception, of a guy running, stepping in the footprint of a dinosaur. Now, if you ever walk through deep snow or walk through mud, the logical place to step is right where somebody else already stepped. You follow their footprints, okay? Some of the footprints were right on top of dinosaur footprints when they were found. A few others were found where the trails crossed, where the dinosaur track was on top of the human track, or on top of part of the human track. Now what would that prove if the dinosaur track is on top of the human track? What does that prove? The dinosaur was there last, right? Sometimes the human track is on top of the dinosaur track. One of the best tracks was, about 8 inches deep in what they call the marl, the limestone. Squished down in there, you look down in there and you see this beautiful human footprints down in the mud. You can see the dermal ridges, everything. Over the years, it gradually begins to get, excuse me, over the years it gradually begins to get worn out. Pretty soon it starts to get distorted where you can no longer see the clarity of it. And then gradually the toe distinction will disappear, and you end up just with an oval-shaped depression. As this track eroded away, it turned into a dinosaur footprint, a three-toed dinosaur. And the human track was right in the middle. Now it was a big oval-shaped depression. And they said, oh, that was never a human track. It was a dinosaur track all along, and the mud squeezed over the toes, and we just didn't see those outer toes. Because if you step in mud and lift your foot out, there's a chance some of the mud will, squeeze in and distort some of the track. And it was pretty deep into the mud. Well, the truth of the matter is, it was both all along. A human stepped on top after the dinosaur stepped there. Mud squeezed in, covered these outer toes, and then over the years, the mud that was covering it eroded away, exposing the other two toes. But because of that fact right there, that's one of the reasons that a few of the people, not all of the people, but a few of the people at ICR withdrew support of the human and dinosaur footprints together. Now, the most recent book on the subject is this one, Texas Tracks and Artifacts. These guys have spent a lot of time researching it. You need to understand what the problem is now with the tracks. The ones that have been exposed for 80 years or 90 years, of course, are destroyed, eroded. The ones that have been cut out and saved in museums someplace, the scoffers are going to say, how do we know those came from the river? So you can't win either way, all right? Even though they videotape while they're excavating these things, they document it, they bring in the news media. Carl Ball lives there, has a museum there, and owns part of the property, and has studied this for years and years and years. That's where his museum is. Now, if you go to Glen Rose, there are two museums. You need to be very careful. One teaches evolution and will say there aren't any human tracks out here. If you go to the state park, they will say, oh, there's no human tracks. Who's spreading that propaganda? But if you go half mile down the road to Carl Ball's museum, you can see the copies of the footprints, the photographs, all the video footage of as they've done all this. What they've done, since the tracks in the river get destroyed by the weather, they will, since they know where the trails are, they have them marked, where the different trails of human tracks are. You can see it in the different books. They go to the river to the edge of the river, chisel out some more rock. There's more footprints underneath. The trail continues under the rock. And they've been doing that for years, exposing more footprints. Dr. Ball has done many digs down there, exposing more human footprints and more dinosaur footprints in this region. Well, finally they now have said you can't dig into the creek bank because creeks have rights. Oh, brother, environmentalists, I give them a hard time. They'll say, trees have rights and creeks have rights. And I say, yep, and oxygen molecules have rights, and you ought to quit breathing. That's what I tell them. They don't know what to say to that. But the books on the subject, if you want to read a lot more, would be this one, The Valley of the Giants by Dr. Daugherty. I don't know if it's still in print. There's a phone number in the front cover if you want to try to get that. Texas Tracks and Artifacts we offer through our ministry here. It's the most recent update on the tracks, including lots of maps and interesting information about the human footprints. And this one is out of print. They still have a warehouse full of them. You might talk them into selling you one. I don't know. You could call ICR and say, can I buy that book tracking those incredible dinosaurs? I don't think they sell them or will sell them. Now, several people from ICR in recent months have gone to Texas and are looking at this situation again and saying, hey, to my knowledge, Dwayne Gish has always supported the idea. And Henry Morris, I believe, still supports the idea. There's a few folks there who do, a few folks there who don't. Doesn't matter to me. I've been there myself. I've seen it. Joe Taylor has a fascinating museum in just out in Crosbyton, Texas, near Amarillo, West Texas. Joe Taylor has spent a long time studying the tracks there also. And you might want to get this book, Fossil Facts and Fantasies by Joe Taylor, where he goes, we offer this through our ministry also. That'd be a good one for you to read, Eric. Okay. The tracks vary in size. Some are just normal human size, size 8, 10, 12. This one is a size 24, the one that I have a casting of. Now this casting shrank a ½ inch when the aluminum cooled. This is cast in aluminum. So we have made a high-density styrofoam copy of this, which we sell in our ministry here, if you'd like one to hang on the wall for a conversation starter. The high-density styrofoam one is exact same size and much lighter to carry around. This is a real nuisance to haul around in the suitcase, which I've done for years to put on display for the kids to to step in. The biggest track they found, I believe, was 24 inches long. This was 17 inches. 24-inch track would be size 35 or something. I don't know. Pretty big. I understand there's some basketball player, Lanier or something like that, that has a size 31 shoe or 33 or something like that. Shaquille O'Neal is a 24 or size 22. Shaquille's is almost this big, not quite. I was at a church one time and there was a kid who had a size 18. He just almost filled it up. So there are people today with feet this big. The difference between this one and modern people today with feet that size, this one's wider. Well, anybody that goes barefoot all their life gets a wider foot. You wear shoes all your life, your foot stays a little narrower than it does if it can spread out, as you walk barefoot. So they've done a lot of excavations there in this region. They've even taken some footprints and sawed them across. You can see where they sawed this one across the toes and across the heel of the foot. And when they look at it endways, they see the mud has squeezed up between the toes. Now some people have argued, like Kurt Wise from Bryan College, a very smart man and loves the Lord and is a young earth creationist, but he doesn't go along with the footprints there because he thinks that you can see these marl lines other places as you cut through. These little lines, these curves as if it was squeezed up into the toes. He said you see that all through the rock. That doesn't prove a thing. That's his point. Okay? So you may not get any support from him if you go to that region, but he's on our side. He's a smart guy. The steps, though, that were found in Texas, in some instances, were 6 or 7 feet between steps. The guy would be probably 8 or 10 feet tall. My normal stride is about 3 feet. If I'm running, of course, it's more. If a guy's 10 feet tall, his normal stride would probably be 6 feet without a problem. Here's Dr. Baugh, a picture with him showing dinosaur and human tracks together, just a few inches away from each other. I was preaching in Arizona. The associate pastor of the church came to me and said, Brother Hovind, I grew up in Glen Rose. And he told me a story. I said, Brother, I want you to put this in writing because people don't believe me. I've got to document everything I say. The scoffers will strain at a gnat in something the creationists say, and then they swallow the camel like believing we're related to a rock, 4.5 billion years ago. I don't know how they can do that. But here's what this guy said. His name is David Smith, associate pastor, First Southern Baptist Church in Cottonwood, Arizona. There's phone number and address and all that stuff right there. He said, Mr. Hovind, I grew up in Glen Rose. He said, I went on an excavation with Dr. Carl Baugh, who lives there. We followed the footsteps of a man which were beside a dinosaur's footprints. It was as if the man were walking with the dinosaur. Nova was there to film the dig. There was also an evolutionist there who had been arguing with Dr. Baugh the entire time. Nova didn't film much of the tracks or our dig, but they did interview this evolutionist. Now Nova, in case you don't know, is a science program. I come on TV once in a while, they show Nova. It means a star that explodes is called a nova. If a big star explodes, they call it a supernova. So it just means an exploding star. In Spanish, nova means won't go, will not move. So the Chevy Nova that sold up here in America, when they took it to Mexico to try to sell it, they had a very hard time selling the car. Would you like to buy a no-go? Oh, I don't think so. Had to put a new name on it or something down there. But, okay, Nova is a TV program that does stuff on science. Nova came to film the interview with this evolutionist and Dr. Baugh and supposed to film the tracks, report on it. He said he told them he had not seen anything there to disprove evolution. What he didn't tell the camera was that he had refused to even turn around and look at the tracks we had been working on. This associate pastor told me, he said, Brother Hovind, we would dig out the tracks, we would tap this guy in the shoulder and say, Sir, look at this. He would say, I don't want to see it. There can't be human tracks here. He wouldn't even look at it. So then he told the camera, I've not seen anything here to disprove evolution. Well, of course not. You wouldn't turn around and look at it. See, in some people's minds, their theory is so important. Any evidence against it, they can't tolerate that thought. It's called in the theory of cognitive dissonance. You run into this when you deal with any of the cults. When you start to prove what they believe is wrong, their brain just rejects it. Can't be true. Of course, I've been taught this all my life. It has to be true. And we all are probably guilty of that, and you have to constantly guard against that. Okay, this guy continues. He said, this man stood with his back to the dig and the tracks while making these statements. Nova knew this man had not looked at the tracks, but they did not report that. Nor did they give Dr. Baugh equal airtime to respond. This is not education, this is indoctrination, and this is the stuff we face all the time. Eric, you get into the debates and you say, these guys are indoctrinated. They're not interested in being educated. They just want to be told what to believe. Okay, one guy said, there must have been a dinosaur then that had feet like a human, if there are human tracks here. That was his reasoning. The petrified hammer that Dr. Baugh has in the museum is pretty fascinating. Battelle Laboratories analyzed it. This was found in 1934 in London, Texas. So it's not in Glen Rose, but it's in the same rock layer that runs through Glen Rose, Texas. This London artifact, they call it, found in 1934. They had already dated the seashells around this hammer at 400 million years old. Part of the handle had turned to coal, and part was petrified. Battelle Laboratories said it was 96.6% iron, 0.26, I can't read, pardon me? 2.6% chlorine and 0.74% sulfur. Well now, my understanding is that their analysis of the hammer revealed there's no carbon, and to make stainless steel you have to have carbon. And the story that I understand is that they were telling Dr. Baugh that you cannot produce this alloy, you can't get these things to combine, unless you do it under a much stronger electromagnetic field. Well, today our magnetic field around the Earth is pretty weak. Your compass still points north, but your body can't tell which way is north. Bees can, and birds can. They can tell which way is north. They just feel it because of the magnetic field. Built-in compass. Probably at the time of the original creation, the magnetic field was about 20 times stronger. We assume that based upon the 300-year study that's been done. In the last 300 years, we've seen the magnetic field of the Earth decline. There's been a 6% decline in 150 years. So that little 6% decline could fit all sorts of curves. You know, I'm not sure, nobody's sure which curve it is, but given the best of circumstances, the magnetic field of the Earth was probably about 20 times stronger. A stronger magnetic field would prevent any meteors from getting in, or most meteors. It would also prevent a lot of radiation from getting in. Everything is focused around the poles. And you could actually feel which way is north, which means you could not get disoriented. You ever been lost? You don't know where you are. Which way do I go? It probably could not happen. See, God thought of everything. When He created the world, He thought of everything. And I suspect after the flood was over, when Noah and his boys got off the ark and they saw this world was destroyed, there probably some bitterness crept in. Like, man, now this is awful. We got to live in this junkyard for the rest of our life. And some people think that's why Noah's son, Ham, became wicked, went bad. And why within a few generations the whole civilization had gone bad again. Just bitterness against God taking away their beautiful world. And sometimes God takes away things from us. Look at Job. God took away everything. Job said, God, if you slay me, I'm still going to serve you. And it's hard to get that attitude, but that's what you got to have, God, you're taking this away from me. Oh well, I'm going to serve you anyway. When we lost our first 3 kids, it was like, God, why? Hey, He's God. Doesn't matter. You don't ever need to find out why. You don't ever have to find out. You just keep loving Him and keep serving Him, okay? He can handle things. Okay, some people have argued they did not learn how to make brass and iron and things like this until just really modern times. You got to understand, God made Adam in His image. God probably showed Adam how to do lots of different things. I mean, there's probably 100 years before Adam sinned. Not only was Adam pre-programmed, of course, fully loaded computer, he spent time walking and talking with God. So God probably showed him all sorts of things. I would suspect God showed him how to find things in the ground, iron, how to do things with it. Here's how you build a fire to smelt this down, and if you add this, it'll increase the heat, and you only got to get to 2,600 degrees, and the iron melts. And I don't know what all God showed him. We'll find out when we get to heaven. But this knowledge of how to work with metals was right there in the first few generations. Tubal-Cain was an artificer in brass and iron. He made things out of these metals, so they had to dig these out of the ground, we would assume, unless the pre-flood world was very different in that, crystals and minerals and things were right on top of the ground in large quantities, and this was all destroyed and reburied in the flood, so now we have to dig for it. I don't know what it was like back then, but certainly they had iron before the flood. And many interesting artifacts are found buried in the ground. For instance, this bell was found in a lump of coal. If you go through West Virginia, Eric, be sure to stop. You called and didn't get to go there. Okay, it'd be neat to get a picture of you holding this thing, okay? This was sent to ICR, and they kept it for a long time to analyze it. They sliced out one of the little bumps in the handle. They figured they could sacrifice one bump, put it back together, and use that bump to, you got to grind it up to analyze it. So that's how they took a sample out. It actually was, if I understand, when it was originally found, the handle had one extra bump in it. But they cut out a piece and had it analyzed to find out what it is. You can call Newt Anderson, 304-842-5556, and talk to him about it. He's the guy who found it. He was about 10 years old when he found this thing in West Virginia. He was breaking open a lump of coal to put in the fire or something, and there was this bell inside. He showed it to his dad or somebody, and you could see where the impression of the bell was in both pieces of coal. The coal had formed around it, obviously. I don't think they saved the coal halves that it came out of, but they saved the bell. And there's his address. You can write to him or call him and get all the information you want about it. Textbooks tell the kids that coal formed 250 million years ago. One of the layers of rock in the geologic column is called the Carboniferous era. Carboniferous from the word carbon, coal. That's why they call it Carboniferous era. There's no such thing as a Carboniferous era. What happened was during the flood, billions of trees would be buried. For one thing, there's an awful lot of coal in the ground right now. There's enough coal, so much coal, that you couldn't make it with all the trees we have in the world. There's too much coal. If you took every tree and bush in the world and smashed it, you couldn't produce the coal in the ground. Very true. And so therefore, skeptics say, see, this proves it took millions of years to do this. No, this proves there were more trees before the flood came. Not only more trees, but bigger trees. Okay, so this flood buried all sorts of things. We find the bell found in coal. In 1891 in Morrisonville, Illinois, Mrs. Culp found a lump of coal, broke it open, and it was a gold chain attached to both halves. About 10 inches long, a little gold chain. The last I heard, Bob Jones University has the chain and the coal. I've tried to trace it down. I called Michael Cremo, who's written the book, The Hidden History of the Human Race. Now, he's a Hindu, and he has a great book, though, on Hidden History of the Human Race, showing human artifacts found where they shouldn't be. They call it OOPArt, out-of-place artifacts. That'd be a good one. Write that down for the quiz. What is OOPArt? O-O-P, out-of-place artifacts, A-R-T. An artifact is something made by man. So an OOPArt is an out-of-place artifact. Michael Cremo collects information on these things, has a tremendous book on all these out-of-place artifacts, and says here we have human chain, obviously humanly crafted chain, in rock 250 million years old. So he says, therefore, this proves man was here 250 million years ago. No, Michael, this proves the rock's not 250 million years old. A lot of these guys do this great research on this type of thing and come to the wrong conclusion. See, they're stuck with the idea that evolution is true. They're stuck with the idea the geologic column is true. Now, how do we fit this OOPArt into this theory? And that's where the whole problem comes in. I called all the culps I could find in Illinois. I spent a fortune on the phone when I was up there, calling culps, trying to trace down what happened to it. The last we could find from the Morrisonville Times and everybody I called was 1959. Some guy had it, this lump of this chain, in his house as a oddball souvenir, and I hadn't found it since then until the rumor I just got a few months ago was that Bob Jones University has it. So I need to call, find out. You can put that on your list, Becky, to call Bob Jones and see if they have the chain found in Illinois. Carl Baugh has this iron pot. He bought it for a fortune off the people who found it. 1912, iron pot was found inside a lump of coal in Oklahoma. This is a smelting pot for melting, you know, probably small quantities of gold or something to heat it up to get rid of the impurities, as would be the theory. He's making replicas of this to sell. If somebody would like a replica of the iron pot, we're going to get one for our little museum here. But this thing was found in Massachusetts. It's supposed to be over 600 million year old rock. Intricately carved. Let's see, Brother Pratsuk, you do inlaid wood, you know, small pieces of wood put together. This is all metal. Zinc and silver, all put together. Very beautiful. They were blasting a piece of rock and this thing came flying out. Now they'd already decided the rock is 600 million years old. So you find a obviously human artifact. You come to two conclusions. Either aliens came here 600 million years ago and left it behind, or humans were here 600 million years ago. They don't seem to realize the obvious, hey, maybe your whole geologic column is baloney. It didn't happen, didn't exist. I'll be tomorrow in Idaho, in Nampa, Idaho. I'm preaching in one of the suburbs there. It's a suburb of Boise. Back in 1889, they were drilling a well. When I was up there, a year ago, I guess, in Boise, I went to the museum where this little doll is, and I read the whole story. They're drilling, when they drill down, I don't know, Eric, if you remember when they drilled our well here for water, as they drill, the sand, they're pushing water down, and the sand piles up around the outside. They call that the tailings. As the sand comes up, they run it off into a little box to collect it, to let the water settle out so they can reuse the water to pump it through as they're drilling to keep the drill bit lubricated. Well, they were drilling in rock 320 feet down. They said this rock is 12 million years old, and this two broken pieces of a little doll came out. So, of course, Michael Cremo's solution is, well, this proves man was here 320 million years ago. No, this proves the doll, the whole geologic column doesn't exist. All of that was done in that one big flood. An obvious human artifact found in 320 million year old rock, they say. No, it's just from the flood this was formed. A couple more thoughts here and we'll take a break. This is from Creation Magazine, 94, March of 94, showing what appears to be a battery from Iraq from 2,000 years ago. Everybody thinks, you know, we just invented electricity in the last, or discovered electricity in the last few hundred years. Fact of the matter is, we'll get into on video number 7 some evidence that they had electricity in Egyptian times 3,000 years ago. They were using it to gold plate things. Different metals, you can use electricity and gold plate them. Workers in Colorado found human bones and a copper arrowhead inside a vein of silver. 1880, they were digging in California. They kept reporting, as they're down deep in these gold mines in California, Placerville, you were just there. Okay, in Placerville, they were digging in these gold mines, and they found all sorts of human artifacts, arrowheads, spear points, mortar and pestle like you grind up corn with, you know, or something like that. But they're digging for gold, under layers of lava that everybody said was somewhere between 9 and 55 million years old. Well, if you're underneath a layer of lava, digging a shaft back into the mountain, and you're finding human artifacts, what are you going to say? How did they get there? J.D. Whitney collected boxes of these things, published articles about it, about things found in California gold mines, down underground. They shouldn't be there. This is called an OOPArt, out-of-place artifact, according to the theory. W.H. Holmes of the Smithsonian, we'll see about them again later, one of the most vocal critics of the California finds, wrote, "Perhaps if Professor Whitney had fully appreciated the story of human evolution as it is understood today, he would have hesitated to announce the conclusions, notwithstanding the imposing array of testimony with which he was confronted." Translate that for me. What's he saying? He should not have published these papers because it goes against the theory that we're teaching. Isn't that what he's saying? If you find something that goes against our theory of evolution, well, don't tell anybody about it. That's what he's saying right there, folks. And that is indeed the attitude that we see. In 1950s, Thomas Lee of the National Museum of Canada found advanced stone tools in glacial deposits in Lake Huron, however you pronounce that island. The deposits were supposed to be 65,000 to 125,000 years old. The director of the museum was fired for refusing to fire the discoverer. Tons of artifacts disappeared into storage bins at the National Museum of Canada. The discovery had to be killed. They said it would have forced the rewriting of almost every book in the business. Now folks, this is not science. If you have to throw out any evidence that doesn't fit your theory, you have a religion, not a scientific theory. Evolution is a religious idea, and when you find advanced stone tool artifacts underneath glacial deposits that you think are so many thousand years old, well then, maybe you ought to relook at the whole picture. Lots of things are found. Human artifacts are found under lava flows, like the California gold mines, and under glacial deposits. I'm telling you, the flood buried the world. The pre-flood world was buried by this massive flood in the days of Noah. And that's why we're finding human artifacts inside sedimentary rock, under glacial deposits, under lava flows. I'm sure there are lots of volcanoes going off during the flood, causing lava, sometimes pillow lava if it's underwater, or ash or layers of ash. And I don't know that the flood, we'll get into a lot more of that when we get into video number 6 on the flood, but I would not say that the flood was continuous chaos over every square inch of the earth, every minute. I think there were probably times when the crust of the earth was flexing up and down, and there would be times where certain areas would be above ground, maybe for a few weeks. In which case you would get wind-blown sand. You may get sand layers, wind-blown dry sand. It would dry out shortly, the surface would, and blow around in a couple of weeks, and then that area gets submerged again. So I think when we see the video in heaven of how the flood happened, you'll say, oh, so that's how this happened, like the cross-bedding of the sandstone in Grand Canyon and all this kind of stuff. Okay. God gave them not only in this original creation a perfect world to live in, He gave them a perfect diet. He told them what to eat. God said in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 29, Behold, I have given you every green herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. God told them to eat the fruit, the vegetables, and the seeds. We don't do that much anymore. We eat the hamburger, French fries, and Coke. And here God said, eat the fruit, the vegetables, and the seeds. It would surprise you to keep a list of everything you eat for 1 week. And then go back and read the list. I mean, everything goes in your mouth, everything you drink and everything you eat for 1 week. Just go back and read the list a week later, and you'll say, boy, I didn't eat much fresh fruit, did I? Not many fresh vegetables, not many seeds. And we're slowly digging our grave with our spoon. And I think an awful lot of people die of diseases and get to heaven early. Christians get to heaven early, and they say, God, why didn't you heal me? I asked you to heal me. I had this disease. And God said, look, I put it in the first chapter. I told you to eat the fruit, the vegetables, and the seeds, and you didn't do it. Don't blame me that you're up here. That's your own fault. It's like somebody that never changes oil in their car, and the motor blows up. So they call up the dealer, my motor blew up. Well, have you changed oil? No, then it's your fault. It's not the dealer's fault, and it's not the manufacturer's fault. It's your fault. And I think most disease problems we have and health problems we have today in the world, the vast majority of them are our fault. And we'll get into that in a minute. But if you eat a peach, you should actually eat the seed if it's organically grown. Now this is important. You don't want to get an artificially stimulated peach that had pesticides and herbicides and all that kind of stuff on it. Organically grown fruit has seeds that contain a string. Now I don't mean eat the hull, the hard part. Inside is a nut that looks like an almond, and it tastes terrible. It'll give you a pucker that'll last about an hour and a half. Some of the old timers look at me and say, pucker, what is that for? Man, I used to know. My dad said, you're getting old when you get all the way across the room to give your wife a kiss, and then you forgot why you came. Yep, getting old, Dad. But I think the seeds contains a vitamin called vitamin B17. Now, I won't go into a long explanation of all of this because you need to get the book World Without Cancer. That has a great, the first half of the book is all about the biology of how cancer works. The second half of the book is all about the politics of why the cure has been suppressed for so long. Why they don't talk about the cure for cancer when it's been known for generations, how to fix or prevent cancer. But the seeds contain cyanide, and I believe benzaldehyde is the other part. Both of them separately are very poisonous. You put them together though, and it's nutritious. Some people argue that cyanide is poisonous, and well, yeah, it is, but that's like saying hydrogen is explosive, therefore don't spray water on a fire because it contains hydrogen. Well, of course, that's silly, Water is hydrogen and oxygen, neither one of which do you want to put around a fire. if you're trying to put the fire out. And yet you put them together and it makes water. The cyanide found in the seeds is nutritious to the body until it bumps into a cancer cell. The coating on a cancer cell is the only known substance that will dissolve away the, break up the vitamin and cause the cyanide to be deadly, and only at that location. So it's selectively poisonous. It's going to kill the cancer cell. There's a couple of good websites, canceranswer.com or worldwithoutcancer.com or hacres for hallelujahacres.com, that can give you lots of information on how to be healthy in this world. But the cancer that we have today is silly that people should die of cancer when it's a nutritional deficiency. I remember one time we were trying to start my Volkswagen. We couldn't get it to start. My brothers had helped me, my dad had helped me. I was only 16, you know, my Volkswagen wouldn't run. We put in new points, new plugs, new distributor cap, new rotor cap. We adjusted the valves, we set the timing, and everything we could think of, and it just wouldn't run. We pushed it, and it would sputter and then die. It would just start to run and then die. Finally, after about 2 hours of working on this dumb car, one of my brothers said, "Look, I know you said there's gas in the tank, but I'm going to check." And he opened up the gas tank, and sure enough, it was out of gas. So I think an awful lot of our medical attention these days is misdirected. We're looking for the virus or the bacteria or something that's causing this disease when it's a lack of something that's causing the disease. It's not the virus or the bacteria, it's the lack of a certain nutrient or vitamin. There's a tribe of folks in northern Pakistan called the Hunzas. Right there on the map you can see Hunza. Hunza is up in the Himalaya Mountains. Some people pronounce it Himalaya Mountains, but it's up in the northern part of this country of Pakistan. There's a Hunza tribe right there. My understanding of this, and people argue about this story, let me just tell you the story, and then people argue that it's true or not, but I understand when the Hunza tribe was first discovered about 200 years ago or so, by outsiders at least, the average age was 160. People in Hunza lived to be 160 on the average. As they had more and more contact with the outside world, it dropped down, and today the average age in Hunza is 90. Well, it's still not bad, living to be 90 is not bad when you consider the average age in America is about 75, and the average age of medical doctors in America is 58. You might want to stop and think about that, So the Hunza leaders average about 90 years of age, and they never get cancer. And their favorite food to eat is apricot seeds. Well, it just so happens that the apricot seed has more of this vitamin B17, or they're called nitrilicides. Now, certain grasses have this also. You see dogs or cats get sick and go out and eat grass. It contains this vitamin B17, or nitrilicides, or some people call it amygdalin, other people call it laetrile, all talking about the same thing. The apricot seed, as far as I understand this, is the highest concentrate of B17 found in nature. And in Hunza, they measure their wealth based upon how many apricot trees they have. It's not how much money do you have, it's how many apricot trees have you got. And so the stories I have read about this say that the Hunzas, after a tree first starts producing fruit, they will break open one of the apricots, take out the seed, and taste it. And if it doesn't taste a certain way, they cut the tree down and plant another one. They know the tree's no good. So it's a big science over there with them, at least, the importance, that's their cash crop, their money. And they never get cancer. Now, if you look at the chart here, people who take nutritional therapy have a much higher survival rate than those who take conventional therapy with cutting and burning and radiation and all that kind of stuff. There are survivors, of course, from both groups, but you have a higher chance of survival with nutritional therapy if you treat it using nutrients, what God has created for the world. For years, the sailors used to die of a dreaded disease called scurvy. The British Navy lost 1 million sailors to scurvy. Scurvy is horrible. You can see what it does to your skeleton. It deforms everything. Sailors were dying of scurvy by the thousands, and over 1 million of them, just from Great Britain over the years. Well, in 1953, Dr. Lind had told that, if you eat fruit, you don't get scurvy. He said, I'm not sure what's in it, but there's something in fruit that prevents scurvy. And of course, everybody laughed at him. Yeah, we're medical doctors. We've been to school, Here you think a fruit will fix a disease. We're busy looking for the cure, you crackpot. What do you think a fruit will do? And typical response today is the same thing. Then finally, after 50 more years of people dying in 1795, the medical profession admitted that fruit would cure or prevent scurvy. And so they started making the British sailors take limes on board the ships. And they called them the limeys. That's where the name comes from, because they had to bring the limes on board. And beriberi was a dreaded disease people died from until 1882 when they finally found the cure was vitamin B. Rickets, vitamin D deficiency. Even today they put vitamin D in your milk. It's vitamin D reinforced because we're not getting enough sunlight. At least we don't get exposed. Well, some people get everything exposed to the sun, but most people don't get enough sunshine to get the vitamin D that the skin, from the sunshine on the skin, causes vitamin D to be formed. Anyway, many diseases are simply deficiencies of certain vitamins. And cancer is a deficiency of a vitamin, of several vitamins. By the time you get cancer, you're probably low on a bunch of stuff. But the Bible says in Psalm 104, bread, God gave herb for the service of man, and bread to strengthen man's heart. It's kind of strange. The herbs are given for our service. Herbs do all sorts of things. They can calm your nerves. You can take certain herbs and just relax and go and sleep better at night. People take melatonin, for instance. It's not a drug. It's just a herb that'll help you go to sleep. And there's a whole study you can study for a lifetime on different herbs and the effects that they have on various different things in human physiology. But this verse continues and says, bread strengthens man's heart. Well, that's an interesting verse. See, about 100 years ago, they had to bake the bread fresh every day because it would go bad. I mean, bread just wouldn't store very long because they were making it from natural components, from wheat that was fresh ground, stone ground wheat and all this kind of stuff, and the bread would go bad. Well, of course, the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil, and they discovered what's making the bread go bad and therefore losing profits is three things at least: vitamin E, lecithin, and the omega-3 fatty acids. Now, we have got an entire videotape called The Bible and Health in our green series of tapes, the topical tapes. You might want to get that one if you want a whole lot more on the Bible and health, because there's just so much to talk about in this area. We'll just suffice it to say that when they took these things out of the bread, two things happened. The bread started lasting much longer, and therefore profits go up. And people started having diseases like heart attacks and strokes and circulation problems. There's a simple formula I tell the kids to remember. The whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead. It's just that simple. They took out about 17, I think, or 19 nutrients and vitamins out of the wheat and flour and invented white bread. Then they added back a few synthetic vitamins and called it enriched flour, enriched bread, and it's killing people. It's not because the bread is harmful to you, though it probably is a little bit. It's because you think you're full, therefore you're satisfied, therefore you're nourished. Well, you could fill your stomach full of sand and feel full, but you're not nourished. Okay? So being full and being nourished are two different things, and an awful lot of people go through life filling their stomach, but they never nourish their system. And you have to really watch that you pay attention to that. It boils down to the two basic philosophies of health and medicine. One philosophy is based upon evolution thinking. Okay? That says your body is nothing but a random collection of chemicals that form by chance over billions of years, and so you treat diseases by adding more chemicals. You add more drugs. It is called drug therapy. If you have a headache, you say, "Oh, doc, I got a headache." He says, "Here, take an aspirin." Well, now hold it. What caused your headache? Was it the lack of an aspirin that caused the headache? I don't think so. You see, what you're doing, you're treating a symptom. And medical doctors go to school and they study how the body does certain things, like how is the pain reflex sent, to the head? What is causing the headache? How do the nerves fire across the synapse, and how can we block that? Well, I think you're barking up the wrong tree here. Instead of figuring out how to give the opposite of the symptom, why not figure out what's causing it? What's causing the headache? Okay, it's not the lack of an aspirin that's causing it. If you're driving on the highway and the oil light comes on the dash of your car, you have two choices. Number one, you can stop and find and fix the problem. Or number two, you can unplug the light. If you say, "Well, the light bothers me, trying to drive and that red light shining right in my face," well, unplug it. Of course, that'd be stupid to do, because the light is trying to tell you something. You're low in oil. Maybe your pump quit, or maybe you just don't have enough oil, or who knows what happened, but a lot of things can happen. The fact is, you better fix the problem instead of unplug the light. And if you go look in your medicine cabinet, you will find a whole bunch of stuff that unplugs lights. That's what drugs do. And sometimes that is necessary. I'm not against taking drugs if you need them for certain things. Go to the doctor. If I get my arm cut off, it's not the time to take a vitamin. It's the time to go to the hospital. And doctors certainly have their place, and there are some awful good godly men, but I am convinced they have kind of a wrong philosophy because they're trained with an evolution underlying thinking that says You treat diseases by adding more chemicals because we're just made from chemicals anyway. If doctors were trained from a biblical perspective that says, you know, God designed the body and God gave us foods and vitamins and minerals to meet our needs, then they would have a nutrition philosophy. See, all sorts of diseases are actually nutritional deficiencies. For instance, if you have warts, you're probably low in zinc. If you get hangnails easily, you're probably low in vitamin C. Or if your gums bleed, or if you get cramps in your muscles, you're probably low in vitamin C. If you get arthritis or sinus trouble, you're probably low in a bunch of minerals that are, most of them are found in alfalfa. Just start taking alfalfa, and a lot of those symptoms will disappear. Now, if you have a sinus headache, you can take, you know, Sinutab or something to kill the pain, but you didn't fix the problem. Didn't fix it at all. The problem is, here in America at least, we want the cure right now. You know, I got a headache, I want it gone in 15 minutes or less, as opposed to looking for the long-term solution. We want the quick fix, and eventually that's going to kill you. There's another philosophy called creation, which says God designed your body and you meet the needs with nutrients. It's nutrition therapy, nutrition theory. You eat the herbs, the vitamins, and the minerals. Okay, let's hurry. There are two philosophies of government also based upon creation and evolution. See, if evolution is true, then there's no creator, so laws come from man's opinion. We get a bunch of folks together and we are going to vote on what's right and wrong. And if the majority think abortion's okay, well, then it must be okay. That's what evolution does, because it takes away the creator, therefore we decide what's best. If evolution is true, then rights are granted by the government. I ask people all the time, you know, do you have the right to drive on the highway? Yeah. Our founding fathers said we have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You can pursue things, you can go places, you can travel. Well, then why do you ask the state for permission to do that? Why would you need to get a state driver's license to do something that God already gave you the right to do? Interesting. I don't have one, and I don't have time for the hassle, so I have an international driver's license, and therefore you can just, you know, travel as much as you want, anywhere you want, and drive anything you want. And the policemen look at it and say, well, what is this, you know? And they say, keep going. They don't ever bother you. And that gets into a whole other area. We've got a videotape called Straw Man you might want to get. We don't advertise that one. It's kind of politically incorrect. But if you want to get the Straw Man video, call our office. They can get you information on that at 877-479-DINO. And they'll send you our Straw Man video. That's only if you want the red pill, for those who saw The Matrix. If you want the blue pill, well then do not watch the Straw Man. See, rights are granted by God. But if evolution is true, there is no God, so rights are granted by government. And the government should be the all-powerful provider. And today we got a bunch of folks who have evolution philosophy. When they have a problem, they look to government for the solution. You know, the government ought to take care of those poor people over there. The government ought to take care of this, and the government ought to do this. And, well, now, wait a minute. We're supposed to be individually accountable. When they were having the big deal on TV and on the news years ago about Hillary's health care plan. She wanted universal health coverage, you know, and they showed these sick people, they don't have any insurance, so we ought to take care of them. Hold on a minute, I understand. People need to be taken care of. However, whose job is it? It's the church's job in cases like that, not the government's job. For one thing, 70 to 80% of all medical expenses in America are from problems that are self-induced. I mean, they take drugs, they overeat, they don't take care of themselves, they don't watch their diet, they smoke cigarettes, and it causes them enormous health problems. And about 70 to 80% of all of our expenses in America are from self-induced problems. Well, they were on the radio discussing this, you know, Hillary's health care plan years ago. And I called in, I said, you know, I forgot to change oil in my car, and the motor blew up. I'd like everybody to help me buy a new motor. And they said, well, if you forgot to change oil in your car, that's your problem. I said, yes, and don't you see it's exactly what you're doing here with health care? If you forget to take your vitamins and you eat junk food all your life and you smoke and you drink and you take drugs and you cuss and you run around with women and wild women and you get diseases, you want me to help pay for your health? I think you created the problem, then you ought to fix it. Or you ought to pay for it, that's for sure. I should not have to pay for their stupidity. And if my neighbor blows up his car engine because he doesn't change oil, I'm not going to help him pay for it. I don't want to be forced to pay for it. I might do it out of Christian charity. But see, taxes are really forced contributions. Put a gun to your head, give me your money. Okay, that's not voluntary. Totally opposite of the Christian philosophy. If evolution philosophy follows through, you end up with a democracy where the majority of the people get together and decide what's right and wrong. Not at all what the Bible intended. Our founding fathers in this country said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They came from the Creator. God made us. Those folks, now they weren't all Christians, but they were strongly influenced by Christianity. And they thought God created it. They said that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Rights that you cannot put a lien against. Well, where do rights come from? The right to get married, for instance. When my son Eric got married, he did not get a marriage license. He had a marriage covenant. He and his wife agreed and promised, according to the Scripture, to be married, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, all that stuff. And all you needed, until about 100 years ago, there was no such thing as a marriage license. You just both signed the page in the family Bible, had 2 witnesses sign it, and poof, you're married. Marriage licenses came in only after the Civil War, when former slaves wanted to marry outside of their race. Some states said, well, you got to get our permission to do that, which you don't, by the way, but that's what they said. And so it gradually grew to where everybody gets a marriage license. And they don't realize a marriage license is a 3-way contract between you and your wife and the state. And that contract basically says, if we don't like the way you're raising your kids, the state gets to take them away. Well, why would you sign a contract like that? But if you don't have a marriage license, then they give you a hard time with bank accounts, and it just, it's a giant problem. And defending our rights has always been a long, difficult thing to do. And I think it's worth doing, and I do. But you need to defend the Founding Fathers' freedoms that they bought for us. So if creation is true, then there's a Creator. And He decides what's right and wrong, and He gives us certain rights that you can't take away. And you don't need the government's permission to do things that God told you can do. Now, if you ask them for permission, they'll be glad to sell it to you, of course. But you don't need to ask their permission to do certain things. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Now, he was not a Christian. I doubt that he's in heaven. I hope he is, but I doubt it. He did not believe in miracles. Here's Jefferson's Bible. I have it here on the screen. The last verse in Jefferson's Bible says, "There laid they Jesus, and rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed." End of the Bible. He thought that's where it stopped. He didn't believe Jesus rose from the dead, and therefore the whole New Testament was irrelevant. But in spite of the fact that he was a deist and not a Christian, he was influenced by Christianity, and he certainly believed there had to be a Creator, and he believed the Creator gave us rights. And that's why they wrote the Declaration of Independence and threw all the tea in the harbor and, founded this great country we have. And it's amazing how many folks today talk about how great the Founding Fathers were. We put their faces on our coins and on our money, and we write about them in our Christian textbooks, and we should. But yet, if it happened again today, it'd be about the same as it was back then. Only 3% of the population followed or supported the revolution. The rest were Tories who were opposed to it or didn't care. The majority of folks didn't care which side won. They thought it was just going to be, nothing would change. And I think today we have an awful lot of people who have given in to unnecessary demands of our government. I think you should obey the law. I do. I obey the law. But I would be throwing the tea in the harbor tonight if the party was going on. Okay, we got to hurry. If creation is true, then laws come from the Creator, and rights are unalienable, and the government should be limited. There's only 2 functions of government that they're supposed to be doing: punish evildoers and defend our shores, defend our country. The government should not be involved in education. They should not be involved in welfare. They should not be involved in about 80% of the things they're involved in. They just have no business being involved in it. And so if we get back to the constitutional limits of our government, the budget would drop to real far down there, probably about 2 or 3% of what it is today. This is called a constitutional republic. Now, in a republic, the law is supreme. Everybody obeys the law because the law came from the Creator. The president, her husband, everybody on down should obey the law. That's a constitutional republic. Genesis 1:30, God said to every beast of the earth and every fowl of the air and everything that creeps on the earth wherein there is life, I've given green herb for meat. And it was so. Originally, every beast ate plants. Some people say, look at those teeth, man, that's a meat eater. No, that happens to be a close-up view of a panda bear. He's a vegetarian. This is a skull of a fruit bat. He lives on fruit, has very sharp teeth. Here's a vegetarian monkey. All it does is eat plants and vegetables. It's got sharp teeth. Before the flood came, everything was vegetarian. Man and animals were all vegetarian, so they weren't afraid of each other. Nobody's going to eat you. Everybody's fine. The animals didn't have to fear man. After the flood was over, in Genesis chapter 9, God said to Noah and the boys, go have a bunch of kids. And boy, they did too. He said, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. The first change after the flood, Animals became afraid of man. The second change after the flood, God said, every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. So God is saying it's okay to eat meat now. You can eat anything that moves, and it's perfectly fine to eat meat, and I do. Okay, I'm not a vegetarian, though vegetarians are probably healthier. Pork chops and bacon taste awful good, so I eat them once in a while. Paul said in Romans chapter 8, he said, for I reckon, by the way, that proves he's a southerner, he said, I reckon that the sufferings of this present time, is there suffering in the world today? Tons of it, right? There's an awful lot of suffering in the world today, and that's what gets the atheist all confused. Charlie Darwin said, I am bewildered. I had no intention to write atheistically, but there seems to be so much misery in the world. Why would God make a world with suffering? He couldn't understand, if God made the world, why did the lions eat the zebras and the other animals? Well, Charlie, that's not the way God made it. See, God made a perfect world, and man wrecked it. But Charlie Darwin's philosophy, in his book, he said, thus, from the war of nature, from famine, from death, the most exalted object we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of higher animals, directly follows. He thought the way to get ahead, for things to get better, is for there to be struggle, suffering, death, misfits. This is Adolf Hitler's philosophy, folks, to a T. Hitler certainly believed that and practiced it. See, God made a perfect world. Animals were all friendly. The lions and the lamb would lay down together. And man destroyed that because of his sin. By one man, the Bible says, death came into the world. Sin came into the world, and death by sin. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians, by man came death. In Adam all die. The reason we have this death in the world is because of Adam's disobedience. And you can't look at a wrecked car and blame it on the manufacturer. Let's send this picture to Chrysler and say, hey, why did you build a smashed minivan? Well, they didn't build a smashed minivan. It got smashed later. And you can't look at today's wrecked world and say, see, God, you made a world of suffering and death. No, God made a perfect world. Man wrecked it when he sinned, and then the flood really wrecked it. So we're looking at a devastated world, folks. Today we live in a junkyard. This is not what God, I mean, this is the same planet, but it's not like God originally made it. It's just been destroyed. But God's going to fix it back someday. He said, someday the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. See, God's going to fix the world back like it used to be. Now we're going to go through a time of suffering here, coming up any day. There's going to be some hard times. And people argue about where the 7-year tribulation fits, and do the Christians get raptured out at the beginning? I happen to believe that, though I'm willing to listen to other opinions. I believe I'm pre-trib rapture. Having studied the subject for years, I still am convinced that's true, though, like I said, I'm willing to listen. Some people think the Christians get raptured out in the middle. They're called mid-trib or post-trib. They get raptured, Christians get raptured out at the end, whoever's left, whoever survived the 7-year tribulation. And then we enter a 1,000-year reign of Christ. And I don't know, I wouldn't be real dogmatic on any of the positions, but the Bible certainly teaches there will be 7 years of trouble and turmoil on this world, and there will be a 1,000-year reign of Christ. And apparently God's going to fix things back like it used to be, because the lion shall eat straw like the ox. That's the way it's not that way now, but that's the way it's going to be. And a child shall die 100 years old, Isaiah 65 tells us. Well, apparently something's going to be different, maybe like it was back under the canopy in the Garden of Eden, where when you're 100 years old, you're still considered a child. That'd be neat to be a kid for 100 years. No responsibilities. That'd be great. I suspect God's going to fix the world back like it used to be in the Garden of Eden, and we will get to live here and see it like it used to be for 1,000 years. Rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. That's going to be great. Well, join us again next week. We'll talk more about the subject of creation and evolution and show you how dinosaurs fit in. Thank you so much.